If you've been enjoying R4E, the Reason for Everything podcast, please be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all platforms or wherever you get your podcasts. Catherine, it's a pleasure to meet you and very excited for our conversation today.
Thank you, Arjan. Thanks so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
I want to start off in the background, folks. For anyone that's just listening, you have a pillow that says "Better is possible." Was that just a fun pickup that you found at a store or online, or is there any bigger meaning behind that?
Yes. Thank you for noticing the pillow. No, I think that it's I love that because it's just a great kind of mantra, especially for people who are interested in starting, mission-oriented, purpose-driven companies. I think that we all think that, we can make things better. And we actually, that pillow came from an event with an organization here in Atlanta, which is where I'm based, called Plywood, which helps entrepreneurs and social good businesses and nonprofits get started. And so we're involved with helping Plywood, volunteering with Plywood. We've been a part of Plywood, and that's where that pillow came from.
It's a beautiful segue to your point on mission-driven organizations. So you're the co-founder of Mission MightyMe, which I'm excited to share more with my audience about. But let's get everyone up to speed. You said you're in Atlanta now. Did you grow up in the Atlanta area, or where are you from originally?
Yes, I did. I grew up in Atlanta and then went away to college and moved to New York straight from college and stayed in New York for about 15 years. So I was gone from Atlanta for about 2 decades and had our first 2 children up in New York and then moved back to Atlanta about 12 years ago. And it's been an awesome place to start a business.
I went to a wedding in Dahlonega a couple of years ago. It was my first time down in Atlanta. It was absolutely beautiful.
Dahlonega is beautiful. It is. Did you go gold mining in Dahlonega?
We did not. I saw all the billboards for it, but didn't get it. It was a quick weekend trip, but didn't get a chance to go gold mining. But a crazy little town there.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So you went to Wake Forest for undergrad, if I did my homework correctly. You're now an Emmy nominee that's had a long career in journalism, and you're an entrepreneur, startup founder today. Did you always want to? Did you think you wanted to go into journalism? Did you think you wanted to be an entrepreneur when you were going through the college application process, getting started in school? Where was your head at? What were you wanting to do with the years to come?
Yeah, I always wanted to be a journalist. When I was growing up, I my mom worked for the New York Times, and she would always be pulling articles for me about Christiane Amanpour and all of these incredible international journalists. And I remember saying, that's what I want to do. I want to travel around the world. I want to tell stories. And when I graduated from Wake Forest, I wanted to move to New York. Did not have that. There wasn't, the perfect journalism job available at the time. So I actually went and got a job at a sports marketing agency, which allowed me to travel all around the world, which was an incredible experience for a 22-year-old straight out of college. Our client was the first satellite telephone. It was, the Iridium satellite telephone. And so our program was sponsoring events that happened all over the globe outside of cellular coverage, where we could really demonstrate the capabilities of a satellite telephone. So I was traveling to the Ray Galois adventure race in Ecuador and the Rally Australia auto rally in the Tanami Desert of Australia, and just these incredible events. The Iditarod dog sled race in Alaska. So I spent my first year and a half out of college just traveling around the world, doing sports marketing with an amazing team of people. And about a year and a half in, a position at CNN opened up. And it was very hard to leave that role of traveling so much, but I knew that I wanted to ultimately get into journalism. Being an entrepreneur was not on my radar at the time. And I jumped to take a position at CNN.
Maybe to, digging a little further there, after a year and a half of what seemed to be a very, very cool job, walk us through, the cost benefit analysis you were running of, you had a pretty good gig going on at the sports marketing agency. Were you afraid that you were going to have that, voice in the back of your head saying, oh, I wish I would have taken that CNN job, or I wish I would have tried again to get back into journalism? Or were you just so ready? Did you just know it in your core that you had to go up to New York and had to get into the journalism space?
That was exactly it. I was just weighing am I going to have regrets if I don't do this? It was a huge pay cut. Journalism, entry-level journalism jobs pay terrible. And it doesn't matter if you're in New York or, Atlanta, they pay terrible. So it was a huge pay cut. I knew I was going to be working around the clock, and the travel was not going to be nearly as glamorous as it was, going off to Japan and Ecuador and all these amazing places. But I just knew that that's what I wanted to do at the time and did not want to regret it.
So you move up to New York. What was the first couple of months like? That transition was probably pretty substantial. I mean, Manhattan's a pretty stark contrast from, down where Wake Forest is. What's the town that Wake Forest is in? It's escaping me right now.
Winston-Salem.
Yeah.
Lots of trees.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes.
What was that experience like for you transitioning up to New York?
Well, I had moved to New York right out of college, and the sports marketing agency was actually in Stamford, Connecticut. So I was doing the reverse commute from Manhattan out to Stamford, but I was never in New York. I was traveling, almost completely for a year and a half. So I didn't feel like I really got the New York experience when I first moved up there. And I was actually sort of okay with that. New York was not, I remember when we would go as a child, and when I told my parents I wanted to move there, they were like, but every time we've ever taken you there, when you were little, you asked where the playgrounds were. When you were older, you said, why are there no trees? We don't understand why you want to go, to New York. But that was where the opportunity was, I felt. So I felt like I needed to go up there. So I was fine with not being in the city. But then once I switched to CNN, I was spending a lot more time in New York. And really learned to love it because I don't know if you've ever lived in New York. Maybe it's a little bit like DC, where your neighborhood is like a small town.
Yep.
So you've got the bodega that you go to every day. You've got, your local coffee shop and restaurants, and you actually do see the same people. And so what I loved about it was that our little, 10-block radius really did start to feel like a small town. And I also just grew to love the energy, because New York has such good energy. You can always find something interesting to do, someone interesting to meet up with. And so I ended up loving it, and stayed for almost 15 years, which was a lot longer than I expected.
I just got back from New York last night around 10 o'clock. And so
you're probably exhausted.
To your point, I get energy. Anytime I go up there, I always get so energized. And I think that's part of the reason why I love it up there. I feel like maybe that's the extrovert in me that gets, fuel from being around others. But I never, compared to other cities that I go to, I never come back from New York really tired. I usually just have that stimulation overload, and it kind of keeps going for the couple of days as I unwind from getting back down here.
Yeah, it energizes you for sure.
Absolutely. Now, what was it like as, you say you took a pay cut going to CNN? What were the first few years of work like for you? How did you find your niche and your role on the production side? What was that like for you?
It was really exciting, because I was just working with incredible journalists and learning so much. I had written for a newspaper when I was at Wake Forest, the Greensboro News and Record, but I hadn't worked in TV journalism. So I was learning a lot about production and shooting and editing. And that was all very exciting. But I was also working around the clock and doing all of the grunt work. I started as a production assistant, which is sort of the typical entry-level job in news. And you do a lot of, you go on shoots and you do a lot of exciting things, but you also do a lot of, transcribing tapes, which back in the day was a very important role that they don't have to do anymore. But it was sort of doing literally all the grunt work to get a show on air. And the first show that I worked for was called Newsstand, which was a news magazine show that CNN had on air years ago. But I soon after moved to became a producer at Newsnight with Aaron Brown, which was the flagship 10 o'clock nightly newscast. And I was actually supposed to have my interview with Aaron, who was, our anchor. I was supposed to have my interview with him the morning of September 11th. And I was in Midtown Manhattan at the Newsstand offices. And, we were all watching what was happening. And he was down at the bureau, 5 Penn Plaza. And so those of us who were still in the Uptown offices, we all jumped in a car and raced down to 5 Penn Plaza to the bureau, that was really like the hub for covering 9/11, and where CNN was broadcasting live from the roof of 5 Penn Plaza. And obviously never had a formal interview, just started working with Aaron and the staff of Newsnight on 9/11, covering 9/11. And that's really how our show was born. And we just, kept covering 9/11 for, all the months to come after it. So we were really all, I say that like my CNN work family really was such a tight-knit family, because I feel like we had all truly just gone through, we had gone through so much together, and we had worked around the clock. And I think those kind of relationships that you form when you go through something like that with people are like very intense. And so I always say that they're still some of my best friends in the world, and my second family.
It's like hardship bonding or trauma bonding.
Exactly.
You were truly thrown right into the chaos and fire that day, I guess.
Exactly. Yes.
So you worked at Newsstand for a few years. At what point did you transition over and work with Anderson Cooper's team?
I think I had been, let's see, it was shortly after Hurricane Katrina. Okay. And Anderson Cooper became the anchor of the 10 p.m. nightly news spot, and we had all covered Hurricane Katrina together. And so our show sort of morphed into Anderson Cooper 360. And I was a producer for Anderson on Anderson Cooper 360 for many years, and just loved that experience so much. I feel like both at Newsnight and Anderson Cooper 360, we were allowed to do really good journalism, really in-depth stories, long-form stories, documentaries, type of storytelling that I think has just become more and more rare on the news in recent years. And I really just appreciated that experience so much.
Let me ask you this. So a lot of my listeners are in, high intensity jobs. People are high performers and type A individuals. For you, that you were seeing true disaster occur day to day in your production role, whether it be 9/11, like you said, or Katrina, or the swath of other events you covered every single day. How were you able to decompress, unplug? What was your routine rhythm like to lay and sleep easy at night, knowing all the craziness that you saw on a given day?
That's a good question. I think we worked so much that we didn't have a whole lot of time for outside, for anything outside. And my friends who were on the show with me, especially when we were covering 9/11 and really working around the clock, they were such huge sources of support for me and for each other. I remember one of my first assignments after things sort of calmed down, but we were still covering 9/11, was to interview the families who had lost someone on 9/11. And another producer who I worked with we shared that job. And so we would interview an average of, you know, 3 or 4 families a day each who had lost someone on 9/11. And that assignment really got to me. It was hard to go home and sort of turn it off. Still gets to me. But having her as a friend and a supporter and someone to talk to, or someone to go walk around the block in between these interviews, so we did them all in the studio, was incredibly helpful. So, I'd like to say I learned to meditate or something, something like that. But I think it was really, I just leaned on my coworkers, and we all sort of helped each other decompress and get through it.
I think it's a great piece of advice, and I feel very fortunate and had mixed emotions when I was starting off. And this is nowhere near the level of intensity or heaviness that you had to deal with, but even just in today's work environment, having to go into the office, I feel very fortunate for having a really tight knit group of coworkers that I can call friends and spend time with, in the office and when we're traveling together. And, a lot of my peers and people that I know that don't go to the office really just don't have that. I feel like I'm fortunate enough that, pre-pandemic, that group that I worked with, or the firm that I worked with, I have a lot of friends that I met through there. The company that I worked at during the pandemic, I met a handful of them in person, but wasn't able to really keep in touch with as many of them in as tight-knit of a manner because we just weren't together every single day. And, breaking bread and sharing experiences, good and bad. And then now my current role, we're in the office most days, or we're traveling together. And, I think it's a great point that having people to lean on and rely on at work is a true blessing in a lot of ways.
For sure. I think it's everything, and it's really hard in this new virtual setup that a lot of companies have. And, for Mission MightyMe, we are pretty much, our team is mostly virtual, but we do try to make sure we all get together once a quarter, because I think it's so important for people to have face-to-face time together. And it's also important for learning, especially for younger employees who are newer to the workforce. You want to be able to learn by being in the room where it happens, right? Not kind of remote and not a part of all those conversations that, sometimes you miss if it's all virtual.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's spot on. I think for, employees that have little ones at home, or, caring for a parent or loved one at the house, or other life obligations in the way, completely different story. And I think that the virtual home or virtual work environment has been a huge value add for a lot of people. And I think for, more junior folks in their career, I saw the value of going to the office and one, from just meeting people. I think it's a great way to meet friends. And obviously it's nice. I'm working from home on Fridays most days, and it's nice to have some time, if you need to run an errand in the middle of the day, or, just need some time to not be on all day, it's nice. But I really like going in and on a given Friday, if I'm working from home, sometimes I hit 5 or 6 p.m. and I haven't spoken to anyone or seen anyone face to face. And so, I mean, a little bit of a rabbit hole there, but I think we're aligned. You mentioned Mission MightyMe and your all's virtual environment, and I want to get to that. Just as we round out your experience at CNN, and then you started your own consultancy out of that as well, could you just maybe tie a knot on that experience on the journalism side, and then we can jump into MightyMe?
Yes, and sorry, because you froze on your last question. Will you repeat it one more time?
Yeah, no worries. The irony of us talking about how good it is to be in person,
Right.
and then, but I'd love to just put a bow on the experience you had at CNN, and then your consultancy that you started before Mission MightyMe, and then we can dive into the fun stuff that you're working on today.
Yes, so I worked for CNN for, it was a little over 10 years, and just, it was a great experience. I loved it. We had our first 2 children a year apart, and I sort of came to the realization that not having predictability was a big problem for our family. And with news, you really do not have a lot of predictability. You're sort of at the mercy of the news cycle. My husband, JJ, was at the time, he's co-founded Mission MightyMe with me now, but at the time he was in investment banking in New York, and he traveled all the time. And so we were both just going in separate directions, and our life was insanity. And it really was not working for having two babies under two. So I decided that I would take a little time off from CNN, focus on being a mom and enjoying, these amazing little human beings that we had, Niall and Harper, our first two daughters. And then we also now have a son, James. But shortly after that, we decided to move to Atlanta to be closer to family. JJ's from Alabama, and then both of my parents, my family was here, and they were just getting to an age where they really needed us. And so we wanted to be closer and move back to Atlanta. And so for a few years in Atlanta, I did just have a hard time sitting still. So I just did all sorts of what for me were fun projects. Some of them were, PR, media relations for clients, but a lot of pro bono work helping nonprofits in Atlanta that I, care about, helping them get media coverage and get good press and good exposure and get their message out. So I did that for a couple of years. And then we ended up launching Do Good Brands because my husband, JJ, and I had always talked about, especially when we were in New York, and he was in investment banking and we always talked about, wouldn't it be amazing if we could do a mission-oriented company together, a social good enterprise. Like, we're big believers that business can be a powerful force for good. And we weren't quite sure what that was going to look like, but we had always dreamed of starting a business that could be a force for good. And I'll say we had a gazillion ideas. I still have a file, this thick of all the ideas, and some of them made it to business plans that I wrote. But we really decided that we had something when we came up with the idea for Mission MightyMe. And I can jump into that story if you're ready for it.
I'm ready and excited to hear more about it. I'd love to hear. When did the idea initially come to you about it? Did Niall or Harper have food allergies, or did James have food allergies? Or, give us the full rundown.
Yes. So Niall is our oldest. She's now 14. And when she was born in 2009, the guidance was not to give babies peanuts or any other allergenic foods in infancy, to wait until they're basically into toddlerhood. And so we did that with Niall, not really thinking too much about it. Food allergies didn't run in our family. It wasn't something that we were really focused on. And then when she was almost 3, she had her first walnut and had a severe anaphylactic, very scary reaction. And thankfully she was okay, but we went through all of the allergy testing after that and found out she was allergic to almost all tree nuts, which, at the time I'm thinking, she's never had a tree nut. How is she allergic to something she's never even had? Thankfully she had peanut butter and she was able to eat peanuts, but we really just adjusted to having a child with food allergies and made sure I had an EpiPen in every diaper bag and, really watched what she ate. And as you know, living with food allergies really does can impact quality of life, and it's a burden. And so she now at 14 has to be her own advocate and manage what she eats and make sure she checks ingredients and always has her EpiPen with her. But we just sort of adapted to being a food allergy family, got all the foods out of our house that she was allergic to, and made sure that we had the EpiPen at the ready. But fast forward to 2015 was the year that we had our third child, James. And that was the year that this groundbreaking research called the LEAP study, the Learning Early About Peanut Allergy study, was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And the LEAP study basically showed that actually introducing peanut foods in the first year of life and then keeping them in the diet consistently through age 5 could prevent the majority of peanut allergies. Almost 90% of peanut allergies for the babies in the study were prevented, which was so groundbreaking that it got tons of news, lots of headlines. I remember reading at the time a quote from Anthony Fauci that said about the LEAP study, said, we're talking about saving thousands and thousands of kids from peanut allergy. This research is going to transform how we approach food allergy prevention, which completely rocked my world, because here we have this little 6-month-old that I'm thinking, if we can get these foods in his diet, we can potentially prevent him from developing a food allergy like his big sister has. But what we discovered is that getting all these nuts, peanuts and tree nuts, there's so many tree nuts, into his diet was just really hard, because nuts are a choking hazard. Nut butters have to be diluted and thinned, and he did not like that. And the entire baby food industry is allergen free, because for years the guidance was the opposite, not to give babies these foods. So we're trying to do this for James, and I kept saying to my husband, JJ, there's got to be some consumer products that make this easy, or else no one's ever going to do it. And we're not going to be preventing food allergies. And at the same time, health guidelines around the globe were changing based on the LEAP study. So the American Academy of Pediatrics, now the NIH, the USDA, every leading allergy organization all say to introduce peanuts and other allergens when babies start solids. So the guidelines have completely reversed. And yet there still were not very many foods out there that made it possible. So we decided to create our own line of foods that would make it simple for parents to follow the new prevention guidelines and include peanuts and other common allergens in babies' diets early. And that's how Mission MightyMe was born. And, JJ coming from banking and I'm coming from journalism, we had not done anything in the food industry before. And we knew we needed to find the experts who knew exactly what this product needed to look like. So we actually ended up connecting with the doctor who led the LEAP study, Dr. Gideon Lack. He's with King's College in the UK, and also Todd Slotkin, who's one of the original founders of FAI and was a chairman of the board of FAIR, and also has children with food allergies. And so the four of us decided to come together and form Mission MightyMe. To really, the goal is to help families prevent food allergies with foods that also just happen to be healthier snack options for babies and kids.
So cool. And I talk about it all the time on this show about how necessity's the mother of invention. What I find particularly interesting, though, is how, I just had Mark Elvidge on, and his family started Vermont Nut Free Chocolates. And they've started Vermont Nut Free because they wanted their son Tanner to be able to have chocolates that didn't have nuts in them. Pretty straightforward. But what's interesting about you all starting Mission MightyMe is you created it so you could help James not get food allergies, which is kind of, counterintuitive in a lot of ways for what you'd initially see at face value of the business, which I think is so cool. And I remember when I was first working at FAIR and I was involved, as they were getting Dr. Gupta's seed study diet started, the start eating early diet. And, I was born in the 90s, and the sentiment from the PCPs and allergists was, hey, make sure the kids avoid the food allergens until they're toddlers. And then, working at FAIR and hearing how the guidance had shifted, hearing, and all of the allergists will be the first to admit, hey, this is something that we could have avoided. The current epidemic is something we could have avoided for the 31 million Americans with food allergies. And so super exciting about your business. And to your point, you came from a journalism background. Your husband came from a banking background. The way you were, I'm sure you're being very humble of, we just decided to put together a consumer business. What did that actually look like for you guys? Were you, having to source? I'm sure there's a huge component about sourcing the actual nuts that weren't cross-contaminated with other allergens. I'm sure there's a whole component about packaging that you would I had no idea, or wouldn't even know where to start. What was it actually like for you guys mechanically? There's a lot of wood to chop. What was the first, task that you were going about tackling there?
It's a great question. There was so much happening all at once. I think the hardest piece of it was just developing the product, because from a manufacturing perspective, pretty much any manufacturer who could make what we were trying to make, which is a quick dissolve, baby friendly puff snack that contains peanuts. So we have one product that contains more than 50% peanuts. It's, like a quick dissolve little puff like you see in every diaper bag. They're ubiquitous, but instead of being mostly rice, ours is mostly nuts. It just dissolves very quickly. And then we also have a tree nut puff that has peanuts and 4 different tree nuts in it, which from a R&D perspective was very difficult to formulate. And we've since expanded into other, flavors. We've got a strawberry peanut puff with, actual strawberry in it, and then a banana peanut puff. But just making our first 2 products, which was a peanut puff and a tree nut puff, was incredibly difficult because, one, pretty much any manufacturer who could create a baby puff was still operating under the old allergen-free guidelines. And also, because we have so many people in this country with food allergies, there's a huge market that has to have, and that's important, that needs to have facilities that are not having cross-contamination. So there just weren't really any manufacturers out there who could make the product that we wanted made and who were willing to do that, because they were, making puffs for Gerber, who wanted everything allergen free based on the old guidelines. And so that was incredibly difficult. The R&D took a long time finding the right manufacturer, and we finally found an incredible manufacturer, but that took a long time. And then in terms of formulating the product, we wanted to make sure that it matched Dr. Lack's research. So the babies in the LEAP study had an average of 6 grams of peanut protein weekly. And that is now what the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends for high-risk babies to have on a weekly basis to prevent peanut allergies. So, but that's about 24 peanuts a week. That's a lot to get into a little baby's tummy. And so we wanted to make sure that, our product was reasonable for a baby to consume the right amount of protein, but also did not feel medical. Right. And so the peanut puff pouch, each pouch is about 6 grams of peanut protein. So we just wanted to make it easy for 1 pouch a week to deliver the right amount of peanut protein, but also for parents to not feel like they were doing something clinical or medicalized, or they had to dose it or think too hard about it, just that they could enjoy it. So getting the peanut protein levels where we wanted them to be was difficult, but then the peanut and tree nut version was even more difficult, because this is a puff that has hazelnut, almond, cashew, walnut, peanut. There's no puff out there that has this many nuts in sufficient quantities that exist. And it's very hard to make, but we, finally were able to, through R&D and working with, Dr. Lack's guidance on the target protein levels for these different allergens, we were able to get them into a quick dissolve puff that also, very importantly, tastes good and is healthy and organic and has all of the attributes that you would look for in a healthy food for a baby, but has the sufficient quantities of nuts. So I think that was a long way of answering your question, that the first thing was just developing the product, which was incredibly difficult from an R&D and manufacturing standpoint. This is not something you can make in your kitchen.
Yeah, no, you answered my question exactly how I was looking for you to. Why those 4 tree nuts? What was the impetus for choosing those 4?
Well, that's a great question. So this may be too inside baseball on on allergens, but nuts are often linked. And so if you have a cashew allergy, you're very likely to also have a pistachio allergy. Pecans and walnuts tend to go hand in hand. We knew it wasn't going to be possible to have a puff that had every single tree nut in it in sufficient quantities. So what we did is we tried to to select one nut from every major nut family. So we sort of so we could cover the most common allergens. And so that's why we, landed on hazelnut, almond, cashew, walnut, and peanut, because that really does have nice coverage in terms of the majority of nuts. But from a manufacturing and R&D standpoint, it is possible to get them all into one product.
Yeah, that's what I figured with the pairings. My most allergic to are pistachio and cashew, right at the very, very top of my list. So I figured it was because of the pairings. Super fascinating.
Very common to be allergic to both, and that's what our daughter is as well.
Yeah, and if you don't mind me asking, is James, was he able to avoid the allergies?
He was, thankfully, and he now.
That's excellent.
It's awesome because he now can, our oldest daughter, of course, cannot have. She can eat the peanut puffs. She can't have the peanut and tree nut puffs. But James and our middle daughter both love the tree nut puffs. And so for James, it's been awesome because he has them with his breakfast every morning. It's so much easier for me to keep him exposed in an enjoyable way than it would be if I was trying to, buy expensive nut butters and, dilute those for him. So it's been awesome for our family.
I think it's so cool how you and your husband, sought out to build a mission-driven business, and you started Mission MightyMe out of that. I'd be curious, what's been the most rewarding part of this very, exciting but challenging journey for you in building this business?
I think the most rewarding part has just been hearing from customers who love the product and feel like they finally have a solution to something that's a real pain point for parents. We hear all the time that, and it's not just families with food allergies, it's, just across the board, but especially the families who have older siblings with food allergies and they're trying to prevent it for their younger ones. I mean, they are so grateful to have found an easy, enjoyable way to get a variety of nuts in their diet regularly, where they don't have to think too much about it and they know they're getting that exposure that they need. That has been really amazing. And then we've also loved hearing from customers who say, I bought it because my pediatrician said I'm supposed to introduce these nuts to the baby, and this made it so easy to do, but then we just kept it in their diet because it's a better snack. It's a better baby puff. This puff has more than 50% nuts. And so we've gotten rid of all the rice puffs that, are 98% rice, and they just eat Mission MightyMe now. And really that is the goal, is to become an all family snack that is just something that's in the pantry. And, Dr. Lack, when he first had the hunch that early peanut introduction was protective, that was crazy back then. Right. Nobody would have thought that, but he was at a conference in Israel, and I just think it's such a fascinating story. He asked the allergists in the audience, this was like the year 2000, this was, 2 decades ago, and he said, whoever has peanut allergies in your practice, could you please raise your hand? And hardly any hands went up. Meanwhile, in the UK and the US, peanut allergies were becoming really common. And rather than just dismissing it, he thought, well, what's different? What are they doing differently in Israel that we're not doing in the UK? Because they have hardly any peanut allergies. And he had noticed that peanut puffs were a really common first food for most of the babies in Israel. And it's because the Bamba peanut puffs are they're like our Cheerios, it's sort of just every household buys them, whether you have babies or not. They're just an all family snack. And so that his theory was that was the reason, because all these babies happen to be having peanut puffs as one of their first weaning foods. And so he went on to conduct an observational study that showed that, in fact, children in Israel had 10 times, children in the UK had 10 times higher rate of peanut allergies than children in Israel. So it was staggering, the difference. And based on that observational study, he was then able to get the LEAP study funded and underway. But it's a long process to do clinical trials. And, the LEAP study was a 5-year randomized clinical trial. So it wasn't until 2015 when the results were unblinded. And to hear Dr. Lack talk about it is just so, it gives you chills, because he said when they unblinded the results from the LEAP study, it was so shocking how protective early peanut introduction actually was. Basically, the babies in the study who did not have peanut foods in the first 5 years of life were 5 times more likely to have developed a peanut allergy at the end. And because of that, he'll say, we probably can't replicate a study like that ever again. It wouldn't be ethical, because now we know it's so, it's so definitive that you couldn't test it out in another clinical trial. It's been decided.
Crazy. Absolutely unbelievable. And so much respect for Dr. Lack and everyone else in the community that's digging in. I think about this all the time. My tree nut and sesame allergies are nothing compared to what some people deal with egg or dairy or gluten or some of the other, anaphylactic allergies that, are harder to avoid. I don't necessarily get to enjoy, or didn't necessarily get to enjoy, Halloween as much when I was a kid, or, eating desserts at restaurants, but, it's nowhere near as bad as it is for some folks. Now, as I think about the new year getting started here in 24, what is top of mind for Mission Mighty Me? What are you all looking to accomplish this year? What goals are top of mind, and what should we be on the lookout for from you all?
I'm super excited about 2024. We have so much coming down the pipeline that I'm a little stressed out right now, but it's going to be great. We just have a lot to do, but we're about to have a big rebrand that will probably launch mid-February. I'm not sure when this is going to run, but you will see a completely different look, and I'm so excited about it. We launched with the branding that we have in 2020, and I've loved it, but I think it's time for us to have a refreshed look, and we're also planning on moving into retail, and so we needed to change our packaging to just communicate better for a retail audience, because that's very different, of course, than someone who comes to your product through your website, where they can learn a lot more, through Amazon, which is currently where we're available, on our website, missionmightyme.com, and Amazon. But we do a lot of educating through our website, and you can do that digitally. You can't do that in retail. Someone walks by your package, they have 3 seconds to look at it, understand what's in the bag, and whether they want to buy it. So we knew we needed to clarify our messaging and our branding, and I think we've done a really good job of it. So I'm excited for that to launch. And our sales, our e-commerce business has just grown and grown. We've doubled sales, more than doubled sales every year since we've launched. So we're excited to keep growing our e-commerce business, but also very excited to scale that even more through retail. And we are also about to close our first capital raise. We've self-funded until now. So our first capital raise is about to close, and that's going to be just great fuel for us to make sure we knock it out of the park when we get into retail. And I know I'm forgetting a few things, but there's a lot going on coming up in 2024 that we're excited about.
No worries. Yeah, I'm so excited to see those announcements go live. I'll be sure to plug all of the links in the show notes, but for anyone listening that wants to get in touch with you or the brand, what's the best way to get in touch, Catherine?
Yeah, you can DM us through missionmightymE.com. We check that all the time. You can also email me, Catherine Jaxon at missionmightymE.com, and it's Jaxon. Or just, we've got all the contact information on the website. So, or LinkedIn me. We're connected lots of different ways, and would love to connect with anybody who's interested in learning more.
Catherine, so appreciative of your time. I'm very excited to see, the many, many exciting milestones that Mission Mighty Me accomplishes, not only this year, but in the years to come. And thank you so much for you and your family's service to the food allergy community and, families that don't even have any exposure there, but you're helping to prevent that. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I love talking with you, Arjan, and congrats to all you've accomplished with your podcast as well.